You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast, coming to you from Montecito, California, where I am getting a little bit better. You're probably getting tired of me talking about this COVID thing, but at least my brain is working. And my brain seems to be working. It's on. And I think hopefully you'll be able to tell with this interview. But it's weird because I've got, what it looks like as I've been reading about, it sounds like there's something called, sort of post-COVID syndrome, or, they call them COVID long haulers or whatever. And it sounds like it affects quite a few people, maybe 30-40% of people who've had COVID, where they end up having these prolonged symptoms, and I had them all, right? I mean, I had like brain fog. That was like number one. Most of that's gone. I don't think I really have much of that anymore. You can be the judge. But then I also, what I'm really having problems with right now is a lot of fatigue, just physical fatigue, and just that's frustrating, right? I'm still not able to hike. I'm not able to do a lot of things, but at least I got my brain back. That's helpful, and it's certainly encouraging to know that there's progress being made there. We are, speaking of progress and my brain, we're very active in the Accredited Investor Club right now, and if that is something that you've been thinking about doing, you are an accredited investor, meaning you make $200,000 a year or $300,000 a year filing jointly, or make $1 million or have $1 million of net worth outside of your personal residence, then you are an accredited investor, and you ought to consider joining our investor club, which you can do by going to wealthformula.com. That's where the magic happens. This is the information, the education, but if you're actually looking to get involved with a community, there's an onboarding process where we make sure you're accredited and all that kind of stuff. And then potentially you can get involved in some of our projects. Today, though, we're going to talk a little bit about somebody else's project. And I think this is a very fascinating space. It's a gaming space. And what I find most fascinating about this is the different world that this is compared to the one that I grew up in, probably the one that you grew up in, because you're most of you I know are around my age, 40s and stuff like that. But it's this whole gaming industry, which, again, I'm totally fascinated by. I don't know a lot about it, but I know some big names in this space because of my interest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and things like that in the past. This is an industry that is bigger than the music and Hollywood and Bollywood and all of these things combined. It's a global industry that's growing at crazy paces. And these games are not like the games that we used to play. They're not Pong and Pac-Man. They're like, really sophisticated games where you got, some kids sitting, some kids sitting in Montecito playing with like 10 other kids around the world, in China and Russia and all that. And they're not just kids. A lot of them are adults, and adults with a lot of money that drop tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars on these games. They're all online, obviously. And it's just absolutely fascinating. And if you think about it, like part of, I think, why people like you and me don't seem to understand this is we grew up in a different reality. We grew up without the internet. We grew up, going outside to play and with phones that were wired, and you didn't constantly see people, and you weren't on the internet all day long. And, we don't have this, the same sense of reality that people in this gaming space do. These people, these kids, their reality includes the internet, right? So there's less of a line, less of a distinction drawn between reality and what's happening in the internet space. Because if you spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day on the internet playing games, and you do that more than you're outside doing other stuff with socially, then your reality actually is in the internet. It's not outside. So in that regard, it makes sense for somebody to, really look at this as a huge investment, right? Like spending a bunch of money on, armor and things like that you buy in these games, all that stuff. It's just really fascinating. And, I would have never thought to invest in this space before because I don't know anybody in this space, or I didn't know anybody in this space. And many of you know, I'm generally not one to step into something that I don't understand at all. But luckily, I met a guy through a friend named Samson Mao, who's a big name in Bitcoin and Blockstream and stuff, but he's also big in the gaming space, and he's a really good guy, and he's very smart. And he had offered me an opportunity to participate in a seed round a couple years ago, and I turned around and said, well, hey, what about my accredited investor group? Maybe we can get them involved. So I know some of you did get involved in that. And so now I'm just following the progress on it. They're on this second round, which is a Reg D 506C. And they've got all these big name investors. They've got like all these designers that are world class in this game. And it sounds like something that could be really, really big. So it's one of those potential asymmetric risk opportunities. And so, just knowing what I know, they did a webinar again for our Accredited Investor Club recently. I just wanted to, do this podcast and let other people know about this. I mean, I think it's a really interesting play for those of you who are looking for, that asymmetric risk opportunity. And it's not something that you see much of. It's kind of one of those things that you kind of have to know people and stuff. And in this case, you know me, and I happen to know these guys. So I am not saying it's going to be a grand slam, but I will tell you it could be. It could be, and it's something to think about. And the investment threshold is pretty low. I mean, it's a $10,000 minimum. So anyway, I have, by the way, I have nothing financially to gain here. I wish I did. I wish I had ownership in this company at like management or whatever, like I do in our real estate stuff, but I don't. I'm not part of this. I am an investor like you. So anyway, when we come back, you're going to hear all about it. You're going to hear from the COO of Pixelmatic. His name's Chris Wood, and we will bring you that interview right after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Chris Wood. Chris and his team have been on the show before. He's with Pixelmatic. He joined Pixelmatic in 2016 as a project manager, and Pixelmatic is a company which we'll talk about in more detail, which is basically they make video games, and not the kind that you and I probably grew up on back in the old days, like Pong and Pac-Man, but things that are slightly different than that. Chris is the COO of Pixelmatic, and he's here to tell us a little bit about investing in this space, and specifically a little bit about the opportunity that Pixelmatic has right now that I know that some of you have already invested in either in the seed round or in the current round that we had featured on a webinar. But now this is a Reg D 506C offering, so I thought, hey, let's bring it out to everybody and make it public. So not public to everybody, but it is for accredited investors. So but anybody can listen in. Chris, welcome back. I think you've been on to the podcast as well. Welcome back to the Wealth Formula Podcast.
Bug, thanks very much for having me. It's always a real pleasure to catch up with you.
Yes, and you are you are a good sport here. You're in where are you? You're in England?
I'm in Shanghai, in fact.
Shanghai, okay, got it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Okay,
so it's 8 a.m. in the morning for me right now, so I've not quite had my morning coffee. So
look at we'll me. I was thinking, well, English accent. He's probably in England or something like that. But no, Shanghai. All right, good. Hope you're staying healthy over there. Chris, I want to start out a little bit, kind of start out at the beginning here. I know we've had these conversations before, but I think this is an interesting topic. It's different from what we usually talk about. So let's talk about gaming in general. When we say gaming and the gaming industry, for those of us who really have not been involved with video games since the 80s and 90s, specifically, I mean, I'm thinking of me, like, back in the day, I was a pioneer for Atari when I was 6 or 7 years old, and then maybe graduated to Nintendo, and they had the Mike Tyson game back in the 90s, and that was pretty much about the end of my video game experience. But this is a completely different ball game. Can you explain or describe what exactly the gaming experience for people is now?
It's completely different. I mean, I've been gaming since I was 4 years old, and I'm in my mid-30s now, and even I struggle to keep up the incredible waves that the gaming industry is making. It's an entire ecosystem that is not what it used to be. It's not the old Dungeons and Dragons or the old Atari, sort of basement dwelling nerds kind of thing. Right. That, certainly when I was a kid, it was still just nerds that played games as such, just, kidding, of course. But now it's very mainstream. I mean, I'm sure a lot of your listeners, their kids or, themselves are playing Fortnite, or they've heard of it at least, Minecraft, World of Warcraft, all these things. And these games are huge. There's millions and millions of players. They're generating billions of dollars. It's an unbelievable ecosystem. And it's not just the games, but of course, I'm sure the listeners will have seen people doing streaming, which even I at first was a bit, well, this is very odd, watching people play games. And I can't imagine this taking off. I don't think that's huge.
I want you to be broad. Assume we know nothing, because honestly, I don't know anything what you're talking about. I don't know what you're... the streaming and stuff like that.
Oh, sure. So
okay. So let's first talk about this now, because I know a little bit about what things look like now. But it used to be that you used to play with a friend who was sitting next to you. That's changed, right?
Completely.
Okay. So talk a little bit about that to start, because that's a different thing.
Yeah, well, everything's online now, right? I mean, even those couch games that people play together, they're dwindling. Gamers, the companies aren't really doing that so much anymore. What they do now is have these massive online games where usually, averagely you'd get 32 or maybe 64 players playing together at one time in some shooting game or something like that. And how they often make their revenues is either by, you buy the game up front like you used to do as a kid, or people will buy these digital items in the game. They'll buy like suits and things like that just make them look really cool.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily make them any better. It just makes them look awesome. Yeah. And this is a huge industry. It's absolutely massive.
So you got people who are playing from all over the world, right?
All over the world.
And so you might be playing against somebody in Russia or, in Shanghai. And you basically are you've got these games that monetize from, I guess there'd be a membership or buying the game first, right?
There's lots of ways. So there's the traditional way, of course. There's some that have subscriptions, like World of Warcraft. You pay every month. These people, if you think about it, they have 7 million players, I believe, right now.
Yeah.
And they have subscription fees. So every month, players pay this money, which is incredible. That really took things to a new level. And of course, like I say, yes, this free to play model where people have little in-app purchases. You may have seen that on your phones or something like this, where people drop $1 or $2 for some in-game
and then they got their weapons and whatever bling they may have for games. And as you mentioned, some of those are, you can get like one of a kind stuff. Right. I mean, you can get. I know a little bit of this because I had invested in a project, called Worldwide Asset Exchange, some time ago, Wax Token. But you can get one of a kind sort of things that you can bring into games, right? And people will pay. We're talking big money for some of this stuff, right?
Absolutely. Recently, there's been some of these what they call NFTs. I don't want to go into too much technical detail, but
non-fungible
let's just
tokens.
say these rare items that people will drop. I mean, there was a recent one which was a record breaker that went for $800,000, I believe. So I mean, it's quite huge. And even there was, in fact, in the early noughties, there was a game called Second Life where people were flipping real estate, which is quite funny. I'm sure that for your listeners, quite funny.
That's interesting.
for hundreds of thousands of dollars, in fact.
Yeah. So literally people are, I think it's a change in perspective for people, I think, who are, in their 40s or 50s and maybe even 30s, I guess, where you look and you say, well, why in the world would people be dropping money like that on things that aren't real? And part of the change in perspective is, well, what's real is kind of different now for a lot of people, right? If they spend a significant portion of their lives online, well, then that is a significant portion of their life. So whereas you might not think it's a crazy idea to spend a couple $100,000 on a Ferrari in the real world. If most of your life is spent in the online space, you may think well, of course I'll spend $100,000 or $50,000 on something if I'm spending. And is that sort of the paradigm shift where you have to kind of get to understand this?
I think so. And COVID has only just accelerated that, really.
Right.
If you think everyone's at home and everyone's sort of digital these days.
Right.
You're absolutely right. It's all about kind of peacocking and standing out and looking cool in front of your friends, right? I mean, there's so much of that. I mean, that's what Fortnite is so famous for, really, is that they have all these different things that you can change your character to look like, these massive IPs that are in there. So these kids are running around like James Bond or whatever, and they think that's great. And it's understandable because, like you say, it's the new Nikes, right? It's the new whatever that you used to wear as a kid. And when you're going out and playing with your friends, it's the same thing.
Right. So for perspective, and we talked a little bit about how this is really a global industry in more way than one. I mean, it's, people are playing everywhere. They're playing next to each other. You have no idea. You could have 40-year-old person in the Ukraine playing against an 8-year-old in Iowa, but how big it is. Give us some perspective on how big of an industry the gaming industry is and the growth of that.
Well, there's 2.2 billion gamers worldwide. It's absolutely massive. So I think to really put it into perspective, it's bigger than music and movie industries globally combined. That's Hollywood, Bollywood, everything. All combined, video games is bigger. Much bigger, in fact. It's currently, I believe, 160 billion and forecasted for 200 billion in 2023. And so you've got this, the compound annual growth rate. The growth rate's been about, I think, 10% over the past 5 years, and it's still maintaining that. It might be 9.5 or something off the top of my head. But at the end of the day, it's been blasting all predictions. I believe in 2014, they expected it would be 90 billion by now, but it ended up being 160. Just because, there are more and more and more gamers constantly. More people have access to games on their mobile phones. Phone game is huge. And it's just becoming more and more mainstream, and the train isn't stopping anytime soon. Most people are gamers these days.
Right. So give me some examples. You mentioned Fortnite. Give me some examples of, some of these. What makes a game, in your opinion, at Pixelmatic? What makes them successful, and how do they end up, and how do they make people money? I mean, you touched a little bit on how they make people money because you got all these things that you can buy as an investor and who's getting paid by the gamers and stuff. But what do you think makes a successful game?
Well, there's a lot of different things in different markets. Like for example, in China, there are some more predatory techniques. Some like very addictive games where you can just pick up and play them, and you just spend small amounts of money. The game that we're building is what we call a massively multiplayer online game. So that's something where you have hundreds of thousands of people playing together. This is like the World of Warcraft kind of game where people assume this second identity. They spend hours on this thing. Like, some people spend like 8 hours a day or more on these kind of games. It's really a second life, very immersive. So these kind of games are hugely successful because they offer this rich experience where you can kind of escape from reality somewhat and go and become a hero and this kind of thing. Games like Fortnite are so successful for a number of reasons, really. I mean, there is kind of a magic formula to something like this, but of course, the way they look, the way they feel, the network effect, where it's simply, you know, if I play this game and I refer friends, it helps, and they love to play together, right? The idea, of course, is that you make teams together, and so you bring your friends, and kids, generally speaking, of course, will all, you know, the word of mouth is huge. But for a game like ours, it's more about having really detailed lore and story and amazing visuals and, you know, quite technical gameplay where players can, because ours are all about spaceships, so they can go into these spaceships and swap parts out and do all this kind of thing.
Why don't you talk about the game? Talk about it. It's Infinite Fleet, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so, what is the game, and what's the game? How do you win, and that kind of thing?
Sure. So I guess the easy way to frame it would be something like Star Trek. You know, so if you imagine, obviously, you know, you're essentially Captain Picard, and you're out there with a fleet of ships. Actually, not just one. You're exploring the universe. It's a massive universe with millions of stars that you can go across, and in this universe, you can build space stations, you can colonize planets, you can mine minerals and take part in a real world economy as well. And really, spend your life in this in space, essentially exploring. And what makes our game very special? You said what makes a game successful? Why we think our game is going to be successful is because we're giving an experience that players haven't really had before, where in our game, what you do in the game actually matters. So what an example that I like to give is that if the the evil aliens that come to attack us, if they come to Earth, for example, our hundreds of thousands of players have to come together and fight back. And if they failed, then Earth could be destroyed. And for the rest of the history of this, the future of this game, Earth would be gone and all these key characters would be wiped out, and we're some nomadic spacefaring race. Now that hits the core motivation of players, because it's the old choose your own adventure stories, you know, the ones where it's like you turn to page 72 or something if you make this decision. That's what's exciting about it.
And you guys have and a big part of this is, obviously trying to find, the right people and the personnel. The reason I know about this at all is because I had met Samson Mao sometime, for a friend of a friend, and Samson obviously is I had interviewed him about Bitcoin some time ago, as obviously he's a fairly well-known person in the Bitcoin space, but he's also, one of the key players in Pixelmatic. And so that was sort of how I had heard about Pixelmatic and what you guys were doing. But one of the things that I thought was really appealing about it was that it had people like Samson. And now you've really got what I would call what looks like a really all-star group of personnel, and also some really well-known big, investors that you can potentially tell us a little bit about as well, right?
And to be honest, I'm not sure where to start, Book. We've just got such a, got so many. Right. But yeah, I think it'd be great to start, I guess, with Samson, obviously he is, as you said, just a massive influencer in the crypto space. He's been around for a while, and he's driven a lot of this Bitcoin, especially ecosystem. The man's a visionary, Don't tell him I said this, but he always gets his blooming predictions right, he always seems to know where things are going. But the thing with Samson as well, he was actually also an executive at Relic and Ubisoft as well, which are these are AAA studios, like massive global studios, and he was basically responsible for the success of Ubisoft in Asia, in China. He started the Chengdu office there and released the Smurfs, which I'm sure is an IP that you guys will be familiar with. He released that globally on Facebook, and it was one of their biggest, most successful games. So that was, he's really great on that. But in terms of, we have 40 people currently distributed fairly globally, but they're led by these top people. So we've got Jason, who's our Chief Creative Officer. Now, Again, I don't want to rattle off all these. I'm not sure if your listeners are going to be too aware of them, but an example would be Age of Empires. He was on the most recent Age of Empires game as a senior game designer, which is just a massive IP for strategy gaming, huge IP.
Just like an all-star crowd, basically, who've worked on a number of very, very successful games in the past.
That's right. And studios like Sega, Bandai Namco, Nintendo, Disney, all of those. With these guys, most of them have had at least 20 years experience in this industry. And we've released, the team has basically collectively released about $1 billion worth of AAA games,
We were lucky enough actually to get into the seed round because of the relationship that we had, and it was an unusual situation. Obviously, I'm not on the executive side or anything, but I think initially it was like, well, do you want to, would you like to invest in this? And I said, well, let's bring it to my group, a seed round, and so that was it was like a year or two ago, right? And now you're on to another round. Maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of where things were during that initial seed round, where people got involved, and where you are right now in terms of development.
Sure. So obviously, I'm very grateful for you guys getting in the first place. A few of your network jumped in, which was wonderful. At that time, it was still very early stages. It was very early stages. But the great thing is that now, by the time we release this podcast, it could be that the alpha of the game's online. It's going to be a matter of days at the moment. So we're really excited about that, and that's going to be open to investors in the first place. And then we're going to be, gradually releasing more to the players. And so, every month or two, we're going to gradually increase the amount of content and increase the amount of players that get in. And so this year is really important for us. This year is really when we're launching the Infinite Fleet. It's very, very exciting indeed. Yeah. But I want to circle back. You asked about the investors and how things are going, and that is something I really want to impress as well, because we recently announced that Tether, the stable coin, have actually invested in Exordium Limited as well, and obviously they're huge. They've got like a $26 billion dollar market cap. Yeah. And also, I don't know if you know Phil Potter as well. He was the ex-CSO of Bitfinex, one of the world's largest crypto exchanges. And a couple of strategic investors too. So we've got Bambo Sofala, who's the head of Xbox emerging markets. So the game's coming out on PC, but we intend to port it to consoles as well, Microsoft, Xbox, and so on. And also Heisenberg Capital. So that's Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert, right? From RT.com and the Kaiser Report. They're just huge financial broadcasters. So they've really been helping out as well. So we've got more. I could keep talking. We've got more and more of these incredible investors that have come in. So I really, it's going quite well.
Right. Big names, like obviously. It's in many ways, it's like kind of like, you've got a track record, you've got big name investors that are actually, it also seems like some of them are strategic investors, it sounds like in that regard too. But so those people just, some of them just came in, it sounds like. And where are you though so you said you're basically at an alpha, you're going to be releasing alpha within days?
Yes.
I got it.
Yes.
Got it. So how do you think, I guess the question people have, obviously, because there's a current, well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about, like, if you're, it sounds like there's still this next round. It's not the seed round that initially we had a couple years ago, but now there's a current round where accredited investors can still get involved. Do you want to talk a little bit about that round?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, so basically, it's kind of split into two. So for jurisdictional purposes, we're doing one raise in the US and one for essentially rest of world, but it's through an EU issuer. So we've been very much promoting the EU side of things because it is it's publicly open to EU residents. But on the US side, as you said, it's a Reg D 506C, so that means accredited investors, of course. We've been talking to your guys. We haven't really started yet We recently went onto your show, and we got an amazing response from that. So thanks a lot.
Yeah. Obviously,
you guys are great.
Yeah, what he's referring to is within our accredited investor group. Occasionally, we do some of these one-offs. We don't always just do real estate, but this was an opportunity that Chris presented to the accredited investor group, which is obviously limited just to our accredited investors. So that's Indeed. What he's referring to as a webinar. But go ahead.
Yes, sorry. And then now we're in advanced talks with a VC fund that's going to be putting in quite a large chunk. So that's looking good. And then we're going to be opening, we're going to be more public and more driving this thing within the next month, because right now we're focusing a bit more on the EU side of things, but certainly for the American, we're making connections and with brokers and things to clear that round. So I think it's going to be going pretty swiftly because, like I say, we're in some advanced talks. And once it gets a bit more public, I think there's going to be quite a lot of appetite just because of the weight that's behind it, really. The EU round's going really well. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. So, and then in that regard, it sounds like an opportunity for people to potentially get involved. And I'll give you contact information in a second. But let me ask you this, because obviously, there's a pro forma, there's all this, the usual stuff for any investment. But really, this is one of those things where it's hard to predict, isn't it? I mean, if something goes viral, becomes the next Fortnite, you have no idea, right? I mean, you're going in there and you're giving a pro forma for a game and some, level of success, but you're not giving a Fortnite, this is going to destroy it kind of thing, right? I mean,
no. So look, I mean, in terms of framing it, there's always risk. There is always risk, of course. You know this, you're an investor. There's always risk in whatever you do. At the end of the day, we're making a media product and people have to like the game. So what do you do when you need to make a media product and people have to like it? You form the best team, which is exactly what we did. So we've got the top people driving this thing. But what I will say is there's something different between Fortnite and what we're building, and there's something a bit more stable behind it. Why is that? Because Fortnite is a shooter. There are so many shooters out there. It could have, for every Fortnite, there's 1,000 that don't work. Okay, it's a very standard type of game.
You mean like a shooting game?
But, yeah, just a shooting game where you kill each other, essentially. But it's quite cool. It is. Right. It's quite cool, But they obviously got the formula right. But what we're doing is this a much higher ambition level of immersive gameplay where all these people are playing together, and it's more. There are not that many of this type of game, and the ones that exist are all unbelievably lucrative. We're talking World of Warcraft, EVE Online, Black Desert Online. If any of these people have heard of these games, they'll know that these things are huge.
Right.
And it's just the thing is, the barriers to entry are a little bit higher. You have to have top people in the team to get there. You have to have some money behind it to make it work.
Sure.
But once it's launched and once it's out there, and you've got the right networking and infrastructure behind it, these games are just huge. They're just really, really huge.
Right. So from the standpoint of when you do a pro forma on these, you're being fairly conservative on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the numbers are pretty high for when you look at the financials, but when you're looking at the competition, it's very small indeed. I mean, we're looking to capture a very small amount of the market in the first 5 years, like something like I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's like 0.05 of the 0.5 of the MMO market, which it's forecasted to be 42 billion in the next couple of years. So for us, in the first 5 years, we expect to make some really good numbers. But in terms of the competition, it's not that high. We are intending to be competitors to the top MMOs long term, without a doubt, and we have
What's
people
MMO?
behind it.
What is
World
MMO?
of Warcraft, EVE Online, this kind of thing. These are making hundreds of millions of dollars. They're hundreds of millions,
Got it.
and we are aiming to position ourselves there. But also, just quickly before we do wrap up, I want to emphasize that it's not just an investment in the game, but the publisher of the game. So this means that we're also going to have a library of games that it's not just Infinite Fleet, but loads of other games in the long term as well. That's the plan. We intend to be the next Valve, which releases a platform of games, essentially. That's the goal here.
Yeah. So right now, minimum investment cost, and what does that get you?
That's 10K. So 10K is the minimum USD, of course. So that's 50 cents per token. So the minimum investment is 10,000 US, and it's 50 cents per EXO token, which is a security token. We haven't really talked about that. I'm not sure if
you want to talk about a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, sure. Just to keep things, as simple as possible. So basically, this is a security token. So it means it is a crypto token, which is a representation of a share of our company, Exordium Limited. So it is essentially, it's a share. It is a share in our company, essentially. It offers you a pro rata dividend, essentially, of 20% of our net profit pool annually. So all the 20% of our net profits every year will be paid out in a dividend pro rata to the holders of the token. Also, it is equity as well. So if there was an event where we're acquired or something like that, then the capital from that would also be distributed 100% pro rata to our token holders. Now, I don't want to get into too much technical detail about tokens. People can reach out to me and I'm happy to discuss that. But the basic simple thing about it is that it is liquid equity. It means that these tokens, even though it's Reg D, usually if you're investing in startups or whatever, it's very hard to liquidate. We will be going on exchanges. So that means that if you wish, you could sell your tokens on exchanges very soon. We've already announced a partnership with INX, which should be coming up within months, basically. So
that's a security token platform?
No, correct. Exactly. So that'll be a security token exchange, which you could, should you wish, sell your tokens at that stage in future. It will be going on the market within a matter of months, in fact.
Is there any restrictions on that with the U.S. and all the SEC?
Currently, yes, because of Reg D, but we are applying for a Reg A+, so that means it will be non-accredited. All these tokens are going to be registered with the SEC, and that means they will be publicly tradable.
Right. And so presumably you'd need to hold on to them for about a year in this
not when the Reg A comes into play.
Well, how would the Reg A come into play anytime soon, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously it's up to the SEC. We all know that they can be kind of slow.
So you've already applied for it. You've already applied.
Yeah, yes. So we're in that process. Form 1A. We're in the final stages of our Form 1A right now. So it's not gone to the SEC yet, but it will within a matter of a week or two. And then it's kind of a bit of back and forth with the SEC. So it's hard to say. It could be a month. It could be 3. I mean, it really depends on the regulators.
Sure. That'll translate over to people who have invested in the 506C.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, those tokens will all be registered in this offering. Yes.
Okay, and then INX at that point, Americans can trade on that at that point.
Correct.
Okay,
absolutely
interesting. Got it. So, and then if there was an acquisition from a large company, is that something you see for these kinds of things? Typically?
It's potential. It's something, it's not something that we're actively on the roadmap looking for. Obviously, at this stage, it's still early days for us. Infinite Fleet for us is a passion project. It's something that we expect to run for 10, 15, 20 years.
Sure.
But let's just say we're not averse to the idea should we get serious traction.
Got it. Very good. How do we get a hold of you if we're, for the accredited investors out there, they know it's a Reg D 506C. How do they get a hold of you?
Okay, well, the best is my Pixelmatic email address, I guess. So it's just Chris, the usual spelling, Chris.wood at pixelmatic.com.
Chris.wood at pixelmatic.com. So it's pixel, Pixel, Matic, MATIC.com. And also, if you can't remember that and you want to just email me, feel free to, and I'll forward it to Chris. I know that's what I did. A lot of you guys did that last time. You can just email me, buck@wealthformula.com, and in the subject line, just put Infinite Fleet forward to Chris and whatever you want to say to Chris, and I'll be happy to forward it to you. Anyway, this is good stuff. I think it's a really interesting opportunity. I want to thank you for waking up early there in Shanghai and getting on the podcast.
No problem, Buck. For you, anything. For you and your listeners, anything.
All right. Good talking to you, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I certainly did. I think this is really fascinating stuff. really good opportunity. I think, the potential on the asymmetric risk side is definitely there. Certainly something to consider. If you're interested in it, email Chris or email me and I'll forward his email. But I think these are the kinds of things that you got to think about. The reason I was pounding him so much on the returns and stuff like that is it's really hard, in my opinion, to what you're trying to do in this is you're trying to pick the game that becomes a unicorn, right? So how do you model out a unicorn? Well, you can't really. And so, the pro forma that you're going to get, they're pretty conservative, pretty successful type games. But what we're really hoping for in this kind of stuff, and again, by the way, those pro formas they're attractive. It's not that they're not attractive, but what you're really hoping for in this thing is that you just, they hit it out of the park and it's like a fortnight and you get, the 10 bagger. That's what, at least for me, that's what I think of when I think of this kind of investment. On the other hand, it could fail. You could lose all your money, and that could be the case too. But one of the things that I find comforting in this situation is the big names involved, including the big name investors, which I think are just going to really help pump this thing. Again, that is completely my opinion. I'm not giving you investment advice. I just think it's really something to look into. So email Chris or email me, and I'm happy to forward it to him. And hopefully you enjoyed the show. It's something a little bit different. And anyway, that is it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.